They fed a generation, filled every table, and then vanished like they never mattered. Why did we let the best meals of the 70s disappear into obscurity? What else did we lose when we stopped tasting the food that once made us feel at home? Porcupine meatballs, rice-spiked survivors. Porcupine meatballs were meatballs with a secret inside. Every bite contained a handful of uncooked rice which puffed and swelled as the balls simmered in bubbling tomato bath. The rice poked out like little spines, giving them their unforgettable name. Kids loved the way they looked. Adults loved how far you could stretch a single pound of meat. One bowl and it felt like dinner had substance. These were not the dainty meatballs of spaghetti fame. These were rugged, thrifty, depression-born survivors repackaged for 70s family tables. You would cook them low and slow, letting the sauce thicken and the meat soften. When you finally spooned one onto your plate, there was nothing fancy about it, just flavor, warmth, and a sense that someone really cared when they made it. Over time, the novelty wore off. The rice got replaced, the meatballs got smaller. But somewhere in a dusty recipe tin, scrawled in fading ink, there is still a card that reads Porcupine Meatballs, and if you ever find it, make them. You will taste the memory. Liver sausage, pineapple, the 70s greatest trick. Liver sausage pineapple was the 70s greatest trick and maybe its greatest crime. At first glance, it looked festive, a sculpted orb coated in parsley and decorated with rows of green olives, each centered with a pimento. A leafy crown of real pineapple fronds topped it off, but inside that tropical disguise was liverwurst, soft, savory, and definitely not fruity. You made it by shaping liver sausage into a rough oval, coating it entirely with chopped parsley, and carefully pushing olives in a perfect grid to mimic pineapple skin. It was performance art in meat form. Guests would gasp when they realized what it was, and then sometimes they would eat it anyway. Paired with crackers and a strong cocktail, it was not bad. Strange, yes, but also creamy, salty, and surprisingly sophisticated in its own bizarre way. The liver sausage pineapple was less about taste and more about spectacle. You were not just feeding people, you were putting on a show. As tastes changed and irony replaced sincerity, this dish became a punchline. But back then it was serious business, and maybe, just maybe, we have lost a little spark in the kitchen now that no one's trying to make liver look like fruit. Tang marinated chicken, the astronaut's marinade. Tang marinated chicken was one of those dishes that made no sense until you tried it, and then it made all the sense in the world. Tang, the astronaut drink with its zippy orange flavor and grainy sweetness, was never meant for meat. But leave it to the 70s to say, what if we used it as marinade? Mixed with soy sauce, garlic, and oil, Tang turned into a bold, sticky glaze that hugged every fiber of the chicken. You would let it sit overnight, letting those citrus crystals melt into something oddly elegant. The result, a beautifully bronzed chicken with hints of fruit and fire. Backyard barbecues lit up with the smell of it. Neighborhood potlucks waited for that one dish with the tangy kick no one could identify. The secret was safe for a while, passed from church cookbooks to school newsletters. But if you ever see an old bottle of Tang in someone's basement pantry, try not to wonder what we lost when we stopped putting wild orange powder on our dinner. Campbell's surprise. Cake, dinner loaf, meatloaf with a punchline. Campbell's surprise cake. Dinner loaf was meatloaf with a punchline and a lesson in humility. Shaped like a cake, layered with peas and carrots inside and frosted with whipped mashed potatoes, it looked like dessert until someone sliced into it and revealed the ruse. The filling was savory, the frosting creamy, and the name, well, that was the real treat. It came from a Campbell's soup promotional recipe designed to help stretch dinner, entertain the kids, and make use of pantry staples in one bold move. And for a while it worked. Families laughed, guests applauded. It brought a spark to what could have been just another boring meatloaf night. Then came the shift towards sleek and serious cooking. Recipes got minimalist, dinner got quiet, and the surprise cake was boxed away with the rest of the gimmicks. But maybe we need those gimmicks again. Maybe we need to laugh when we cut into dinner. Maybe we missed the surprise. Oven-baked Bologna Cups, pure kitchen ingenuity. Oven-baked Bologna Cups were pure kitchen ingenuity molded from necessity. You took slices of bologna, pressed them into muffin tins, and baked them until the edges curled up into little edible bowls. Then you filled them with mashed potatoes, scrambled eggs, creamed corn, whatever was on hand. The bologna crisped at the edges, sizzling like bacon, but held firm enough to cradle its filling. It was a food hack before food hacks had names, a trick passed from mums to babysitters to latchkey kids who needed something warm and satisfying without a lot of fuss. The flavor was rich, salty, and a little smoky. For a while they were everywhere, breakfast tables, lunch trays, even party platters. Then came the fall of Bologna. Deli meat got complicated, tastes got refined. But there was a time when a Bologna cup felt like love, when it meant someone thought enough to make something clever from almost nothing, and that kind of thoughtfulness, that still matters. Crab Louie salad, the dethroned queen. Crab Louie salad was once the queen of cold plates. Crisp iceberg lettuce, ripe tomato wedges, hard-boiled eggs, olives, and a generous mound of crab meat, all draped in tangy, creamy Thousand Island dressing. It was elegant, it was dramatic, and it was a sign that someone was celebrating. In diners and hotel dining rooms, Crab Louie was the highlight of the chilled salad section, and for decades it ruled. But over time, tastes changed. Thousand Island dressing went out of fashion, crab got expensive, and iceberg lettuce was replaced by arugula and radicchio. The queen lost her throne. But some still remember the silver trays, the lemon wedges, the chilled forks. They remember ordering it with a smile and feeling like royalty. Crab Louie was not just a salad, it was an event, and somewhere in a quiet diner, frozen in time, she waited. Freshly baked dinner rolls, the church kitchen aroma. Few aromas could fill a church kitchen quite like freshly baked dinner rolls, soft, buttery, and served warm. These rolls were a symbol of homemade care and hospitality. Devotion dinner rolls were the kind of recipe passed down through families, often scrawled on flour-dusted recipe cards and perfected over decades of Sunday suppers and holiday feasts. Homemade bread has deep roots in American culinary history. Long before mass-produced loaves became the norm, in the 1970s, scratch-made dinner rolls still held their place on church tables, reflecting a time when baking bread was both an act of love and a nod to tradition. With simple, affordable ingredients like flour, yeast, and butter, these rolls were versatile enough to accompany anything from soups to pot roast, making them a must-have at potlucks. So why are they now more a memory than a staple? Blame the rise of convenience foods. The introduction of pre-packaged rolls and frozen bread dough offered busy cooks a shortcut that didn't involve kneading or proofing. And while nothing quite compares to the taste of homemade, time-consuming recipes often took a back seat as modern life sped up. Braised oxtail roast, soul food heritage. Some traditions die super hard though. Braised oxtail roast and oxtail in general is something you probably never will be able to separate from the African American community here at any point in time. Hey, it's not like other people don't enjoy it, but if you want your oxtail done right, authentic and exploding with flavor, you best go to a black mum. You might be wondering where the roots of all this stem from. Well, besides just how oxtail was given to slaves because it wasn't as desirable of a cut of meat as others, African American cuisine often takes on a lot of influence from West African culinary traditions too. Lots of dishes like a goosey stew, for example, also feature bone-in cuts of meat. Braised oxtail roasts, on the other hand, were a stew that was just really hard to beat. After emancipation, most African American communities started to rely on oxtail a lot, and braised oxtail roasts became a key part of Sunday roast culture for a lot of families. It's still probably the most prevalent thing on the list today, at least for now. Butterscotch brownies, the blonde alternative. Butterscotch brownies, or blondies, mix it up with brown sugar, butter, flour, eggs, and baking powder, all jazzed up with butterscotch chips. These goodies swapped out chocolate for a sweet caramel-like vibe and caught on fast. They were super easy to whip up, making them a go-to for anyone needing a quick dessert fix without the intense richness of chocolate. Their ease of preparation and ability to store well made them popular for potlucks, school functions, and holiday treat exchanges. Over time, though, as bakers got more into gourmet and unique flavors, blondies weren't the main event anymore. Usually you'd find them cut into squares, laid out on a platter, perfect for grabbing a bite without any fuss. The combo of a chewy middle with a bit of crunch around the edges really made these stand out during an era when convenience reigned supreme. No-bake peanut butter pie, church, potluck, champion. Few desserts captured the hearts of church potlucks quite like a no-bake peanut butter pie. With its creamy, sweet peanut butter filling nestled inside a graham cracker crust, pious peanut butter pie became a symbol of simplicity and indulgence. It was rich, satisfying, and best of all, didn't require turning on the oven, a blessing for busy cooks and warm kitchens. The origins of this dessert lie in the mid-century love affair with peanut butter, which soared in popularity thanks to its affordability and versatility. Pairing it with sweetened condensed milk and whipped topping, staples of the time, turned humble ingredients into a decadent treat. The graham cracker crust, first popularized in the 1930s, added a buttery crunch that balanced the pie's smooth filling. It was practical, easy to assemble, and required little more than a refrigerator to set. Yet, as dessert trends evolved, this pie began to fade from favor. The rise of more elaborate, multi-layered confections and a push toward healthier eating made its rich, calorie-dense filling seem out of step with modern tastes. Savory JellO molds with ham and pickles, culinary bravery. Savory JellO molds with ham and pickles walked the line between culinary bravery and outright madness. You started with unflavored gelatin, beef broth, and a bit of vinegar. Into that shimmering amber dome, you added chopped ham, sliced pickles, maybe some hard-boiled egg and peas if you were feeling fancy. The mold jiggled, it glistened, it smelled like lunch and aspic, and maybe a bad idea. But people ate it at church luncheons, school functions, and retro dinner parties. It was served with pride, efficiency in edible form, protein, vegetables, and gelatin-bound structure all in one slice, and in a strange way it worked. Eventually tastes changed, gelatin lost its grip, savory molds became a punchline, not a course. But the memory stuck, because for all its weirdness, that dish said something. It said, I made this from scratch with effort. And sometimes you have to respect the effort, even if it wiggled. Sweet and sour Frank's toothpick joy. Sweet and sour Franks were party food for people who wanted joy on a toothpick. Tiny cocktail sausages, often cut into halves, simmered in a pot of grape jelly and yellow mustard. Yes, grape jelly. The result was a glossy, tangy, sticky glaze that somehow turned those humble Franks into irresistible bites of bliss. You serve them from a crock-pot, steaming and fragrant, with colored toothpicks and little paper napkins. The combination of sweet jelly and sharp mustard made them addictive. They hit every corner of the tongue, and they were shockingly easy to make. You did not need training, you just needed a can, a jar, and some heat. Then came the diet years, the fear of sugar, the war on preservatives. Sweet and sour Franks were banished to the land of remember when. But let us not forget, these were not just appetizers. They were tiny time machines, each one a sticky little memory of carefree gatherings, plastic cups, and music in the background. Tuna twist casserole, the weeknight miracle. Tuna twist casserole was the kind of weeknight meal that lived in every suburban kitchen, quietly performing miracles. You would grab a box of that long-gone tuna twist seasoning mix, stir it into canned tuna and pasta, and suddenly a plain pantry became a dinner table centerpiece. The boxed mix had some kind of magical quality, full of dehydrated herbs and powdered vegetables that punched way above their weight. It smelled like comfort and tasted like you were getting away with something fancy. Kids begged for seconds. Adults felt like they were beating the system. There was something about that salty, tangy richness that made you forget you were eating a glorified tuna noodle bake. And for once, Tuna did not mean sacrifice, it meant celebration. Then one day, the boxes disappeared. No warning, no explanation, gone like a dream you can barely remember. And yet, for the people who remember, no fancy meal will ever replace the warmth of that bubbling, cheesy, perfectly ordinary miracle. Stuffed pigeons with chestnuts, pure gluttony. Yes, stuffed pigeons with chestnuts was something that people actually did regularly reserve for their tables for Sunday roasts. And yes, this is definitely gluttony, not bordering on the edge, not a stone's throw away, just pure, unadulterated gluttony. Stuffed pigeons were a traditional dish brought onto American kitchens primarily through immigrant communities. By this I mean you can once again curse the British for their food. I really don't get what goes on in the kitchens in that country. Feels like every step they take is like playing Russian roulette. The chestnut thing was actually something brought into the equation thanks to the French. Apparently chestnuts are a pretty popular stuffing in that region. It makes sense that we tried things like this since, in the middle half of the 20th century, all we ever did was delve as deep as possible into European cooking. Thing is, this dish was only possible because people regularly kept pigeons and raised them on their farms and in their living spaces. Thanks to mass urbanization, your typical two-bedroom in New York just doesn't come equipped with pigeon-raising facilities these days. Hamburger boats, fast food fantasy, homemade. Hamburger boats were the fast food fantasy you made in your own oven. Soft hoagie rolls were sliced open and hollowed out, their middles filled with a molten mix of ground beef, ketchup, onions and cheese, topped with more cheese and baked until bubbling. These little submarines of flavor sailed straight into the hearts of every hungry teenager across the country. You did not eat hamburger boats with a knife and fork. You picked them up with two hands and hoped gravity would show mercy. Over time, the recipe faded. People traded hamburger boats for frozen pizza and microwave meals, but somewhere out there in a yellowing recipe book with a cracked spine, someone has the instructions written down in pencil, and when they make it again, just once, they will remember what it felt like to hold that warm, messy, meat-filled miracle in their hands and think, this is all I need tonight. Molded chicken salad ring, elegance trapped in gelatin. Molded chicken salad ring was elegance trapped in gelatin. Take cooked chicken, chopped celery, pimentos, and a splash of mayonnaise. Mix it with unflavored gelatin and chicken broth. Pour into a ring mold, chill, unmold, garnish with deviled eggs and maybe a sprig of parsley if you were feeling fancy. Molded salads were big in the 70s. They were a way to make leftovers feel like luxury, a way to transform chicken scraps into something presentable, something worth talking about. Of course, tastes changed. The gelatin revolution collapsed. Cold chicken became chicken salad again, and the molds went back into storage. But there is something haunting about the precision of it, the care, the pride in making dinner not just edible but sculptural. Molded chicken salad ring was never just about flavor, it was about effort, and that, in its own jiggly way, is kind of beautiful. Frosted meatloaf, theater on a plate. Frosted meatloaf was not a joke, even if it looked like one. Picture a meatloaf, dense, rich, spiced, shaped like a cake. Then imagine it covered in creamy mashed potatoes, smoothed over like frosting, sometimes piped with green peas or ketchup roses. It was both delightful and a little disturbing, and it was everywhere. Church suppers, holiday tables, potlucks. It made an entrance. You sliced into it the same way you would a birthday cake, and every cross-section revealed swirls of ground beef and potato layers. Kids loved it because it felt wrong. Adults loved it because it stretched dinner into something festive without spending more than a few dollars. It was theater on a plate, and somewhere along the way, that became embarrassing. People stopped frosting their meatloaf, they stopped giving it shape. We went back to rectangles and gravy. Frosted meatloaf is a monument to a time when presentation mattered, even if what you were presenting was ground beef in disguise. Corn chip taco bake, dinner by way of crunch. Corn chip taco bake was dinner by way of crunch, a layer of seasoned taco beef smothered in melted cheddar and canned corn, crowned with a glorious, chaotic heap of corn chips. It was a casserole that thought it was a party. Crunchy, cheesy, salty, satisfying. It was the kind of meal that made Tuesdays feel like Fridays. You could make it in one pan, you could feed a family of 6, and best of all, you could use whatever was in your pantry. It was loud, it was messy, and it disappeared faster than any sensible dinner should. Then came the quiet years, health warnings, sodium talk, whole grain everything, corn chip taco bake, quietly packed up and left without even a goodbye. But its crunch still echoes in memory, and every once in a while, when the pantry is low and the mood is right, someone brings it back, and the room lights up like it is 1978 again. Deviled ham logs, cocktail hour champions. Deviled ham logs were spicy little bricks of indulgence dressed up for the cocktail hour, but made with whatever you had in your pantry. Take a can of Underwood deviled ham, mash it with cream cheese, Worcestershire sauce, and chopped pimento. Roll it into a log, coat the outside in parsley or crushed nuts, serve it with Ritz crackers, and watch it vanish before anyone asked what was in it. It was salty, creamy, with just enough heat to feel cheeky. In the 70s, it was the belle of the bridge club. No gathering felt complete without it. The combination of canned meat and dairy might sound suspect today, but back then it was considered resourceful and stylish. And if you ever find yourself holding a butter knife and a box of crackers at the edge of a family potluck, do yourself a favor. Make the log. Chinese pie. Survival food with French roots. Chinese pie, or American tourtière, as some called it, was the kind of layered meal that tasted like it came from another time because it did. Ground beef on the bottom, creamed corn in the middle, mashed potatoes on top, baked until golden and bubbling. It was peasant food, comfort food, survival food. Its roots were French-Canadian, but in the 70s it became a staple in the colder states, Maine, Vermont, Michigan, places where hardy meant necessary. This was not the kind of pie you brought to a celebration. It was the kind of pie that showed up when your fridge was empty and you still had 5 mouths to feed. Simple ingredients, no fancy seasoning, just layers of warmth. The meat soaked into the corn sweetened the potatoes, and it all came together in one giant spoonful that somehow reminded you that everything was going to be all right. And if you are lucky, they will still know how to make it, because some things only survive if someone remembers them. Shrimp Wiggle, military heritage comfort. Shrimp Wiggle was a name you either laughed at or leaned into. A creamy concoction of shrimp and green peas in a white sauce, spooned over toast or rice. It wiggled on the plate, it jiggled in your spoon, but it always delivered warmth in a way only vintage meals can. It came from military cookbooks and made its way into American homes during the post-war years, lingering well into the 70s. This was not just a meal. It was a testament to what you could do with a can of shrimp, a handful of frozen peas, and a dream. Eventually it slipped away into obscurity, replaced by boxed dinners and microwavable trays. But there is something defiant about a dish like Shrimp Wiggle. It asks you to remember a time when food could be strange, honest, and still make you feel whole. And if it makes you smile to say it out loud, even better. Tomato aspic with veg-all, the jiggly dare. Tomato aspic with veg-all was not just food, it was a dare. A jiggly ruby red ring made from tomato juice and unflavored gelatin, packed with canned mixed vegetables that barely knew what season they were in. It sat proudly on buffet tables, trembling in the spotlight like a crown jewel from another planet. The flavor was tangy, savory, and oddly refreshing. It was meant to be elegant, a sort of salad meets art installation. It was unapologetically weird. And then one day, it vanished. People stopped putting vegetables in gelatin, they stopped calling it salad. But those who remember it can still hear the soft schloop as it slid out of its mold onto a plate. And they remember how, even with all its oddness, it somehow brought everyone to the table, maybe not to devour it, but at least to ask, what on earth is that? Macaroni loaf, cold pasta innovation. Macaroni loaf was cold, solid, and weirdly wonderful. Imagine a chilled slice of pasta, yes, pasta, bound with gelatin and studded with chopped ham, olives, pimentos, and whatever cheese you had lying around. Served in tidy cross-section slices, it was the potluck darling of the 70s. You did not serve it warm. That was the point. Macaroni loaf was built for summer gatherings, refrigerated trays, and situations where you needed something that looked impressive but cost about $3 to make. It was not trying to be Italian, it was trying to be innovative, and for a while it was. People praised its portability, its stability, its strange sense of class. It was a dish that knew its place and did not ask for more. Then pasta stopped showing up in gelatin and people decided they liked their noodles hot and saucy again. The macaroni loaf faded into memory, quiet, dignified, and just a little bit slippery. But if you ever see one at a family reunion or on a table covered in plastic wrap and paper doilies, give it a second look. It may not be glamorous, but it is proof that for one brief moment, America thought cold jelly pasta was the future. Mock lobster tails, breadcrumb dreams. Mock lobster tails were a culinary illusion, a trick pulled off with white fish, paprika, and imagination. Lobster was expensive, rare, and a fantasy for many households in the 70s. But imitation, that was accessible. You would flake cooked white fish, usually cod or haddock, mix it with breadcrumbs, mayo, and just the right balance of spices, including that all-important paprika. The mixture would then be shaped into elegant tail-like forms, sometimes nestled in cleaned scallop shells, brushed with butter and baked until golden. The result? A buttery, seafood-flavored creation that looked like it belonged at a five-star restaurant, even if it came from a $5 grocery bill. For kids who had never tasted real lobster, it was magical. For adults, it was resourcefulness on a plate. The flavor was close enough, the look spot on. But the truth? It was never lobster, just another dream dish born out of necessity and a little showmanship. Eventually, lobster. Polynesian meatballs. Tiki paradise. Polynesian meatballs brought tropical flair to living rooms across the country. Made with ground beef and breadcrumbs, the meatballs were bathed in a glossy, sweet and sour sauce of pineapple juice, brown sugar, vinegar, and soy sauce. Toss in green bell peppers and chunks of canned pineapple, and you had yourself a party in every bite. It was inspired by the tiki craze that swept through American dining culture in the 60s and 70s. Suddenly everyone wanted their dinner to feel like a vacation. Polynesian meatballs made that dream a reality. Served over rice or skewered with toothpicks, they were equal parts appetizer and main dish, loved by kids and cocktail drinkers alike. The sauce stuck to your fingers, the pineapple added a tangy zing, the meatballs soaked up all the flavor like little sponges of paradise. It was joy disguised as food. But when the tiki trend fizzled, so did dishes like this. Sweet sauces fell out of favor, meatballs went back to marinara. But if you have ever had one bite of that sticky, fruity, beefy goodness, you know this was not just food. It was escape, a bite-sized passport to the islands, even if you never left your dining room. TV dinner-inspired Salisbury steak, bake, homemade nostalgia. TV dinner-inspired Salisbury steak bake was nostalgia baked into a Pyrex dish. It had all the elements of the classic tray meal, beef patties, gravy, mashed potatoes, but it was homemade, heartier, and proudly oversized. The steak was shaped from seasoned ground beef, seared for texture, and smothered in rich brown gravy. Mashed potatoes were piped along the side, maybe with some peas or corn tucked in for color, and if you were feeling fancy, you carved faux grill marks into the patties with a butter knife. It was performance, not just dinner. Families who could not afford constant takeout or had grown up on frozen meals found comfort in making their own version of the television tray fantasy. It was a weekday luxury, a weekend staple, one dish, one oven, one nod to the atomic age dream of eating well without effort. Eventually, people moved on, microwave dinners improved, taste buds demanded bolder flavors, but this homemade Salisbury steak dish stood for something, a belief that even when food came from humble ingredients, it could still feel iconic. And when you serve a plate that looks like something you saw on television in 1975, it does more than feed you. It transports you. Celery Victor, humble vegetable royalty. Celery Victor was the side dish that thought it was royalty. Created at the turn of the 20th century and revived in the 70s, It was nothing more than poached celery marinated in vinegar, beef broth, and herbs. But it felt like high society. You served it cold, arranged like spears of green elegance on a chilled plate. Sometimes there were thin slices of pimento or lemon curls on top for flair. It was crisp, tangy, refined. In hotel buffets and dinner parties, celery Victor was a signal. You were not here for casserole, you were here for culture. It came from the era when vegetables were supposed to be clean and structured, not buried in ranch dressing. But for all its pomp, it was incredibly affordable. Just celery, broth, and thyme. That was the beauty of it. Celery Victor made something out of nothing and made it feel expensive. Over the years it vanished quietly, too plain, too subtle, too green. But there is something poetic about a dish that dared to take the most humble vegetable in the crisper drawer and treat it like a star. Celery Victor did not just dress up dinner, it made it feel like an event. Spam and Mac Deluxe, comfort food's crunchy crown. Spam and Mac Deluxe was comfort food with a crunchy crown. Imagine a baked macaroni and cheese casserole, but loaded with cubed spam, then topped with a thick layer of crushed cornflakes. It was salty, cheesy, creamy, and crispy all at once, a full sensory experience built from pantry staples. Spam, for all its stigma, was the unsung hero of the 70s dinner table. It did not ask for much, and it gave you everything. Families made it when budgets were tight, when groceries were sparse, when time was short, and it always delivered. Somewhere along the way it got shelved. Too old-fashioned, too salty, too honest. But Spam and Mac Deluxe still lives in handwritten notes and family cookbooks, waiting for someone brave enough to bring it back. Because in a world of trendy recipes, this dish never tried to be cool, it just tried to be loved. Egg foo young patty sandwiches, leftover brilliance. Egg foo young patty sandwiches were born from leftovers and a little late-night brilliance. After a takeout dinner of egg foo young, those thick, savory Chinese-American omelets packed with bean sprouts and scallions, you would find yourself staring at a cold patty the next day, wondering what to do with it. Then came the solution. Slap it between 2 slices of soft white bread, smear on a little soy sauce-infused mayo, and suddenly you had a sandwich that was way better than it had any right to be. The sandwich had that balance, salty, rich, chewy, with just a little tang. In the 70s, it was a quiet favorite, especially in cities where Chinese-American cuisine had become part of the weekly rhythm. Today it barely gets a mention, but those who know, they remember the comfort. They remember the fridge door swinging open, the sound of a knife scraping mayo from the jar, and the small, perfect silence that followed the first bite. Cottage cheese and pear salad, the midday sigh. Cottage cheese and pear salad was the midday sigh of relief for a generation. On its surface, it was laughably simple, a canned pear half, carefully placed on a piece of iceberg lettuce, topped with a round scoop of cottage cheese, and finished with a bright red maraschino cherry. It was the definition of retro elegance, the kind of thing you saw at lunch counters, women's clubs, and hospital cafeterias with an air of polite satisfaction. It said, "I am trying, but I am tired." Then, without warning, the world moved on. Cottage cheese lost its glow, pears got pushed to the back of the shelf, and that neat little salad faded away with the rotary phones and lunch trays that served it. But every now and then, someone still builds one, and when they do, it is not about flavor. It is about memory, a memory that fits perfectly on a leaf of lettuce. Chipped beef pizza toasts, the oddball crossover. Chipped beef pizza toasts were the oddball crossover nobody saw coming, but everybody devoured. Take a slice of plain white sandwich bread, toast it until golden, then ladle on some creamy chipped beef in white sauce. Add a swirl of tomato paste or ketchup, sprinkle on shredded mozzarella, and broil it until it bubbled into a gooey, salty mess. In a decade full of strange culinary hybrids, this one actually worked. Kids scarfed it down after school, parents made it when payday was still too far away. It was the food of improvisation, of fridges with very little in them. But it did not feel like a compromise, it felt like a secret recipe passed from kitchen to kitchen. Over time, chipped beef faded back into military lore, pizza evolved, but those toasts, steaming and chaotic on a baking sheet, remain etched in the memories of people who knew how to turn not much, into something wonderful. Zucchini boats with tangy tomato glaze, healthy without punishment. Zucchini boats with tangy tomato glaze were the 70s answer to eating healthy without feeling punished. You sliced zucchinis in half, scooped out the insides, and filled them with a seasoned mix of breadcrumbs, ground meat, onions, and whatever spices the pantry allowed. Then came the tomato glaze, a sharp, sweet, sour coating made with ketchup, vinegar, and a hint of sugar that dripped over the stuffed boats like sauce on a meatloaf. The zucchini stayed firm, the filling stayed moist, and somehow it all worked. Healthy trends changed, and zucchini boats were left behind in the shuffle, replaced by kale chips and smoothie bowls. They disappeared quietly from dinner tables. Still, when the summer gardens bloom and the zucchinis come in fast and heavy, someone remembers, someone reaches for the old recipe card with the tomato-stained corner. And when the boats come out of the oven, you remember too how the 70s tried to lighten up, and for a brief moment actually did. Tater tot crusted chicken pie, casserole rebellion. Tater tot crusted chicken pie was casserole rebellion, served by the scoop. Beneath the golden, crispy crown of tater tots lived a bubbling mix of shredded chicken, creamy mushroom soup, peas, and shredded cheese. It was everything a kid could want and everything a stressed-out parent needed. Easy to make, easy to love, zero leftovers. This was the kind of dish that defined Tuesday nights in Middle America, a mashup of chicken pot pie and fast food daydreams. The tots got crunchy, the filling stayed hot and gooey. Frozen foods became suspect, processed meals were scorned, but back then nobody cared. You put that baking dish on the table and everyone came running. Today people still make versions of it, but the original full, fat, unapologetic glory is hard to find. But if you ever bake one again, do not skimp. Stack those tots, pour on the cheese. Remember the joy of digging into something made just to make you feel full and happy. That was the point. That was the magic. Peanut butter and bacon sandwiches, chaos you could hold. Peanut butter and bacon sandwiches were chaos you could hold in your hands. Thick slices of white bread slathered with creamy peanut butter, then layered with hot, crispy strips of bacon. Sometimes it was grilled, sometimes eaten cold. Either way, it made no sense, and perfect sense all at once. The sweetness of the peanut butter, the smoky crunch of the bacon. Together they created a flavor so wrong it was right. Kids loved it because it felt like breaking the rules. Adults loved it because it kept everyone quiet for 10 minutes. In the 70s, this was an after-school classic, the kind of snack that came out when leftovers were gone and creativity took over. Eventually, food got cleaner, more curated. Bacon became artisanal, peanut butter went natural, and this sandwich disappeared into whispered memories of weird cravings and childhood indulgence. But sometimes you remember it, and in that moment, you know the truth. Flavor never cared about logic. It just wanted to be remembered. JellO pudding pops. The Cosby connection. Back in the late 70s, JellO rolled out pudding pops, turning the frozen treat game on its head with something way creamier than the usual ice pops. Made from milk, sugar, and pudding mix, these pops were all about delivering a super smooth, rich taste. At their peak, pudding pops were so popular that they spawned a range of flavors including chocolate, vanilla, and swirls. They totally stood out thanks in part to those catchy Bill Cosby ads shouting, "Pudding in a pop." That marketing charm made these treats a big deal in households across the board. But even with their popularity, Kraft decided to cut them from the lineup in the early 2000s. They were trying to slim down their product range. The bright, fun packaging and that quirky non-wood stick are what a lot of folks remember about them. Charity cherry salad, retro dessert star. In the heyday of retro desserts, Charity cherry salad was a shining star at potlucks and family gatherings. This chilled dish combined bright maraschino cherries, velvety cream cheese, and fluffy whipped topping, creating a dessert that was as vibrant as it was indulgent. Served in elegant glass bowls or set in decorative molds, it added a touch of flair to any church supper table. The popularity of dishes like this can be traced back to the mid-20th century when refrigeration revolutionized home cooking. Desserts that could be prepared ahead of time and served cold became the ultimate convenience for busy homemakers. maraschino cherries, roasted parsnips with maple glaze, Depression-era survivors. Roasted parsnips with a maple glaze weren't really anyone's idea of a perfect Sunday roast. Still, it's something that wormed its way onto the tables of every household everywhere. The reason for that was that parsnips was something that were really always by the side of the American people during one of their worst times. That was the Great Depression. Parsnips were easy to grow, easier to prepare, and very simple to cook. You could roast, steam, or boil them, and you could do it all over an open fire. So there was never really an issue of inaccessibility. Give a food like that a few solid decades and it definitely becomes an acquired taste. Now, the maple glaze, on the other hand, was something that we got from European tradition. European immigrants were some of the very first people to ever popularize maple glazes, and since maple flavors were already something America was well accustomed with, well, you can see where this is going. As far as vegetables go recently, though, parsnips have been going through a rough patch. Some would even call it a downfall, but I think they'll make a comeback still. Rabbit in white wine sauce, gourmet on a budget. Rabbits in white wine sauce were a funny thing. Ideally, there's probably nothing more gourmet than being served something like this. A fancy European-style white wine sauce with a perfectly tender and juicy rabbit. It just sounds like rich people food, you know? Which is why I wonder if you'll be surprised when you find out that rabbits actually weren't all that expensive or luxurious to get. Nowadays, you can get away with passing a rabbit dish as a gourmet experience depending on the skill of the chef and the complexity of the dish. Back then, though, we were just talking about Sunday roasts. Arguably, cooking the white wine sauce was harder than the rabbit here. Still, the culture of eating rabbits is something that I think began in the Great Depression. People were so low on game, chicken, and just sources of meat that they began to hunt, and rabbits were one of the most abundant resources available. I think from there on, lots of people, especially hunter families in the South, rediscovered a newfound appreciation for rabbit and its soft, buttery flavors. Snowball Cakes Winter Wonderland treats. Snowball cakes are all about that winter vibe with their fluffy marshmallow filling and a coating of shredded coconut that looks just like snow. Inside, there's a chocolate sponge cake that keeps everything rich and interesting. These treats got their name from their cool, snowball-like appearance, making them a hit during the holiday season. They used to be all over the place as pre-packaged snacks from brands like Hostess, known for their fun and distinctive look. But as people started choosing more natural and less processed options, snowball cakes kind of faded out. They were usually wrapped up all neat, making them easy to grab and go. Slow-cooked beans with hog jowls, Southern tradition. In the days when nothing went to waste, a pot of slow-cooked beans with hog jowls and onions was a way of life rooted in Southern cooking traditions. This hearty meal was a staple at church potlucks and community gatherings. Pinto beans, rich in protein and fiber, were an affordable way to feed a crowd, while hog jowls, a cut from the cheek of the pig, added smoky, savory depth that transformed the humble legume into something extraordinary. Historically, this dish thrived in communities where resourcefulness was key. Hog jowls, often considered a byproduct, were a favorite in Southern cuisine where the whole hog philosophy reigned supreme. Combined with onions and slow cooking, the result was a dish that was simple, yet deeply flavorful. And let's not forget the practicality. Beans are inexpensive, shelf-stable, and could simmer all day while the cook tackled other tasks. But as modern tastes shifted, hog jowls fell out of favor. Health trends, coupled with the rise of leaner meats, left this dish behind in the dust of culinary history. Convenience foods like canned beans and pre-seasoned mixes didn't help either. Wild boar shoulder roasts from hunters to Andrew Tate. You know, guys back in the day used to hunt feral pigs and make wild boar shoulder roasts out of them. Nowadays, they listen to Andrew Tate. You got to start wondering where we went wrong with everything. No, but really, wild boar shoulder roasts were a thing, and not only were they a thing with a lot of historical and culinary reference. So basically a super important thing. The dish was a heritage of regional cooking that blended the best and most practical parts of Southern and Native American influences. Wild boars aren't something that were native to America, and indigenous people were the ones who were the most proficient hunters. They were also the ones who did the most experimenting and found out that things like smoking and roasting work really well here. You might think, but if they aren't native, how come so many are there in the South? Well, that has to do with how boars were introduced by Spanish explorers in the 1500s. Basically, those boars had escaped into the southern side of the country, and that's why you see so many in the South. Wild boar became a sign of bounty and became associated with feasts, holidays, and eventually roasts, but we've really moved away from hunting as a country. Watergate cake, scandal-inspired sweets. The Watergate cake, popping up in the 70s, was all about riding the wave of the famous scandal it's named after. This pistachio-flavored cake made with pistachio pudding mix sports a funky green color and a nutty taste, lightened up with some club soda. It's usually decked out with a frosting that's also got pudding in it and sprinkled with pecans, making for a pretty unique look and texture. The whole novelty of its theme and the connection to a wild moment in politics helped make it a hit. But as people started digging more natural and less artificially flavored sweets, its star faded. Watergate cake was typically a sheet cake, super easy to slice up for casual gatherings. Fellowship, fruit cobbler, canned convenience. In the era of resourceful cooking, few desserts embodied practicality quite like a fruit cobbler made with canned fruit cocktail and a biscuit crust. Fellowship fruit cobbler was a mainstay at church potlucks, offering a sweet, bubbling dessert that could feed a crowd with minimal effort. The dish gained traction in the mid-20th century when canned fruit cocktail became a pantry staple in American homes, a product of clever marketing and food preservation innovation. Fruit cocktail offered a colorful mix of diced fruits that made desserts feel festive. Topping it with a simple biscuit crust not only stretched the dish, but gave it that golden, flaky finish that felt homemade even when shortcuts were taken. As versatile as it was, the cobbler started losing its shine by the late 20th century. Fresh fruits became more accessible year-round, and modern palates leaned toward desserts with more nuanced flavors and textures. Canned fruit cocktail, once a novelty, began to feel dated. But for those who grew up with it, this cobbler remains a comforting reminder of shared meals, church fellowship halls, and a time when food was about bringing people together, not about impressing them with gourmet flair. Braised lamb shanks with mint sauce, Irish heritage. Braised lamb shanks with mint sauce are also something that have a particularly long history in America, and this time it's with an Irish spin. Now, before we talk about what inspired this, let's talk a bit about the shank in general. This fine cut of meat has always been underappreciated since it came from the lower leg of the animal and was a lot tougher. It was something the wealthy class looked down upon because it was a dish you had to work for, kind of like crabs. The more tender and soft meat was, the easier it was to eat, the more it would be associated with wealth. Lamb was also something that was really common in the 20th century throughout places like New England, where a farming culture really thrived. This rustic dish was a big part of the nose-to-tail style of eating, where families would devour every part of an animal in the name of not wasting a single bit of it. Personally, I think that's pretty considerate and respectful. How do you feel about it, though? While you type it out, let me tell you a bit more about braised lamb shanks. They fell out of fashion because, in general, people just didn't appreciate the gamey taste of lamb too much as time went on. But they were considered a big Sunday roast staple for people who were born in homes with farming-oriented lifestyles. Magic Cookie Bars, Eagle Brand's gift. Magic Cookie Bars got their start from an Eagle brand recipe in the 60s and caught everyone's attention with their awesome taste and texture game. Imagine a buttery graham cracker crust layered with sweetened condensed milk, then piled with chocolate chips, butterscotch chips, coconut and nuts. It's a chewy, gooey slice of heaven. They were a cinch to whip up and didn't need much time in the oven, which made them a hit for busy bakers and holiday times. Interestingly, they also go by the name Hello Dolly Bars in some regions, adding a bit of theatrical flair to their homey appeal. But as years passed and people started leaning towards fresher and less processed goodies, the craze for these bars kind of fizzled. Usually they were cut into squares or bars, rocking a no-fuss rustic vibe that made them super easy to serve and enjoy. The mix of sweetened condensed milk with coconut and chocolate created a taste that screamed 1970s home baking. Dill pickle dip, tangy party favorite. In the 1970s, dips reigned supreme at church potlucks and family gatherings, and few were as delightfully quirky as dill pickle dip, a creamy blend of sour cream, cream cheese, and finely chopped dill pickles. This tangy appetizer offered bold flavor with minimal effort. Whether served with crackers, chips, or vegetable sticks, it was an unexpected crowd pleaser that stood out among more traditional offerings. This dish emerged during an era when convenience and creativity defined home cooking. Dill pickles had been a staple in American pantries since the early 20th century, and combining them with creamy bases like sour cream or cream cheese was an innovative way to transform basic ingredients into something new. It was practical too, easy to whip up, affordable, and well-suited for large gatherings. So what happened to this retro favorite? As culinary trends evolved, so did dips. Flashier, more complex recipes featuring exotic ingredients like artichokes and sun-dried tomatoes became the new standard, leaving humble dill pickle dip behind. And for those with pickier palates, the sharp, briny flavor wasn't always a hit. Dill pickle dip evokes nostalgia for an era when recipes were shared on index cards, and the measure of a good potluck dish was how quickly it disappeared. Poke cake, the 70s innovation. Poke cake hit the scene in the 70s and got everyone excited because you could do so much with it. After baking a simple vanilla or chocolate cake, you poke holes all over it and fill those up with JellO, pudding, or sweetened condensed milk. This trick lets the filling soak into the cake, making it super moist and adding layers of flavor. JellO pushed this idea big time, showing everyone how a plain cake could turn into a showstopper. It was a hit because you could tweak it with different fillings depending on what you were into. But as tastes got more sophisticated and folks leaned towards less sugary stuff, poke cake kind of lost its spotlight. It was usually served in a big dish, looking casual and family-friendly. You'd often see it with a fluffy layer of whipped cream on top, maybe some fruit or sprinkles too, just to make those flavors pop. Sauerkraut surprise German-American heritage. In the culinary traditions of many German-American communities, sauerkraut held a place of honor, and sauerkraut surprise brought that tangy staple to church potlucks in a way that was both hearty and unexpected. Baked with apples and pork chops, this dish balanced savory, sweet, and sour flavors to create a comforting, satisfying meal that could feed a crowd with ease. The origins of this recipe are deeply rooted in German and Eastern European immigrant cooking. Sauerkraut, a fermented cabbage dish, was prized not only for its flavor, but also for its long shelf life and high vitamin C content, a crucial factor in preserving health during the winter months. Pairing it with pork was a natural choice. Pork chops were affordable and readily available, while apples added a touch of sweetness to offset the kraut's tanginess. This combination was practical, filling, and adaptable to any church dinner or family gathering. Despite its versatility, the dish began to lose favor as modern cooking trends leaned away from fermented and pickled flavors. Additionally, the strong aroma of sauerkraut could be polarizing, making it less appealing to younger generations. Hummingbird cake, Southern Living's star. Down in Greensboro, North Carolina, Mrs. L.H. Wiggins came up with the hummingbird cake, which Southern Living magazine made famous in '78. This cake's got it all: bananas, pineapple, pecans, cinnamon, and it's topped with a killer cream cheese frosting that ties all those spicy and fruity flavors together. It became a big deal fast thanks to its unique taste combo and the fact that it was pretty easy to make for any kind of get-together. Over time, though, as dessert trends evolved and global flavors took the spotlight, the hummingbird cake kind of drifted out of the mainstream. The cake is particularly beloved in the South, where it remains a celebrated part of regional culinary traditions. Typically, this cake was stacked up high in layers and generously slathered with frosting, making it a showstopper At parties, Yorkshire pudding stuffed chicken British fusion. Yorkshire pudding stuffed chicken is a really imaginative dish. It's something that takes roasted chicken together with Yorkshire pudding, and while that really might be breaking too much away from tradition for some people, it's also a testament to how much of British cuisine America's really imported. Like it or not, I think we have a knack for European food if history is anyone to listen to. The idea to combine Yorkshire pudding with roasted chicken was something that worked out because of boredom. People wanted a twist on the typical British Sunday roast, and the pudding would typically be served on the side. This time around, it was used as a stuffing. The batter would soak up the juice entirely, and this enhanced the flavor of the meat and gave the pudding a new flavor entirely. It worked because of this flavor fusion, and despite how it's taken a bit of a back seat in recent times, thanks to all kinds of new avenues available to people when it comes to fusion food, this variant of Yorkshire pudding and roasted chicken was definitely a really fun Sunday roast meal. Jubilee jambalaya casserole, Louisiana, in a dish. The rich, spicy aroma of a well-seasoned casserole was often the highlight of church potlucks, and Jubilee jambalaya casserole was no exception. This baked version of the Louisiana classic brought together rice, sausage, shrimp, and a bold Creole spice blend. It was hearty, flavorful, and had just the right amount of kick to leave everyone asking for the recipe. Jambalaya, with its roots in Spanish, French, and African culinary traditions, became a staple in Southern cooking centuries ago. Its adaptability made it a natural fit for church gatherings in the 1970s. Stretching expensive ingredients like shrimp with affordable staples like rice was economical, and baking it in a casserole dish made it easy to transport and serve to a crowd. Sausage added depth, and the Creole seasoning brought a vibrancy that elevated the dish beyond your average casserole. So why don't we see it much anymore? As jambalaya purists reclaimed the stovetop tradition, the baked casserole version began to lose its charm. Add in the rise of quicker meal solutions, and the labor-intensive nature of the dish didn't fit modern schedules. Herb-crusted roast goat, Sunday mood setter. Herb-crusted roast goat is a dish that would rock your world and set your Sunday mood right for the rest of your 24 hours. It was a perfect combination of tenderized goat meat with a herb coating that was full of flavor. Goat was one of the oldest meats consumed across the world, and in a lot of ways, it still is. Herb-crusted roast goat basically just means either a whole cut of the goat or just a partial cut of it is coated with a rich blend of spices, herbs, garlic, and olive oil. You might be wondering how this is different from, well, just about any other kind of seasoning or spice mix. So the idea here was that the crust of the goat would do two things to the meat. It would give it a fragrance, an ambiance, something that would help it stand out. Now that we had the issue of presence dealt with, the next was dealing with presentability. This dish just looked beautiful. The herb crust was vivid and full of robust colors, and it was a sight for anyone's sore eyes. However, looking good and feeling dramatic don't sell out restaurant seats or fill in empty ones on a table. The most important thing here is flavor, and luckily, that's where this shines. The herb crust locks in moisture and helps flavors stay trapped in the meat, making sure that you get an incredible tasting cut of goat at the end of all this hard work. Magic Pan Crepe Cakes, Restaurant Theater. Magic Pan crepe cakes come from those Magic Pan restaurants that made crepe dishes a big deal back in the 60s and 70s. Here's how they do it. They layer up thin crepes with all sorts of fillings, from sweet creams and fruits to savory cheeses and spinach. Basic crepe batter is pretty simple, just flour, eggs, milk and butter, but when you stack them up and fill them just right, it turns into something special. Each layer was carefully assembled to ensure the flavors melded beautifully, providing a gourmet experience that was rare at the time. These crepe cakes were a hit because you could watch them being made right in front of you, which was pretty cool back then. Though they were a favorite for a while, as the Magic Pan spots closed down and eating out got more casual, crepe cakes weren't as common. When they served them, it was always with style, dressed up with a little sauce or a sprinkle of powdered sugar to make them look as good as they tasted. These dishes were more than just food. They were the heartbeat of American dining rooms, the centerpiece of church potlucks and the comfort that greeted families at the end of long days. Each recipe tells a story of resourcefulness, creativity, and a time when presentation mattered as much as flavor. In our rush toward sophistication and health consciousness, we may have lost something precious: the willingness to be playful with our food, to turn humble ingredients into something magical, to gather around tables where surprise and comfort lived, side by side. If one of these meals stirred a memory, if you remember the warmth of that bubbling casserole or the laughter that followed the first bite of something wonderfully weird, then these dishes served their greatest purpose. They weren't just feeding bodies, they were feeding souls, creating memories, and proving that sometimes the best meals come from the biggest risks. Drop it in the comments if any of these brought back memories. Like the video and subscribe for more forgotten flavors, because some tastes are just too good to forget, even if the world has moved on without them.